Good evening and Happy New Year. Hopefully 2021 will be a very different year than 2020, but I'm glad to see you all back on Shakespeare Hour Live. I am Dr. Drew Lichtenberg, the resident dramaturg at the Shakespeare Theatre Company, and we hope you all had a wonderful and safe holiday season since we saw you last. I don't know what else is going on in the world. It seemed like the perfect week to come back and do a new episode of Shakespeare Hour Live. Before we get started with our amazing panel and our guest of the hour, Miss Dianne Wiest, I would like to thank our sponsors. The Shakespeare Hour Live is a component of Shakespeare Everywhere, which is made possible by the visionary support of the Beach Street Foundation. Additional support for Shakespeare Hour Live is provided generously by Nan Beckley, and tonight's episode is sponsored by Susan B. Height. So our panel, we've gathered an incredible panel tonight, and quite a Yale-y panel, if I don't say so myself, in celebration of the work of Dianne Wiest as part of our Shakespeare Icon series. It's my pleasure to introduce first James Bundy, the artistic director of Yale Repertory Theatre and dean of the Yale Drama School. James, are you there?
Yes, hello.
And I think I know the answer already, but where are you calling us from tonight, James?
I'm in New Haven, Connecticut, on the lands of the Wappinger and Pawcusset peoples.
And how was your holiday season, James? Was it a good break from what I'm sure was a kind of challenging semester in many ways?
Yeah, it was great. It was quiet. There was no fear of missing out on anything. So one stayed close to home and caught up on reading and puzzles and other domestic bliss.
And we don't often have the artistic director of the Yale Repertory Theatre or other theater. We've had some artistic directors in the past, but I'm curious to know, we are currently shut down in Washington, D.C., and we are not performing on our stages yet. We've had to pause because of Mayor Bowser's orders. Is the situation similar in New Haven and in Connecticut? What is your solution right now for the problem of what to put on your stages or not?
Yeah, we're more shut down even than you are, because we don't have a vibrant series of Zoom conversations going either. Our buildings have roughly 700 years of deferred maintenance, including their HVAC systems, so it's not possible for us to work in most of them. And so we have over 300 classes at the School of Drama in any given year, and they're all online except for the one in-person class that is required by the Department of Homeland Security and ICE for first-year international students.
Right. So logistical challenges galore.
Yes.
In other words, and well, it's good to be seeing you again, James, and thank you for joining us. And can't wait to hear more of your contributions tonight.
Great to see you, Drew. Also
joining us, Dr. Catherine Sheehy, the resident dramaturg of Yale Repertory Theatre and chair of the Department of Dramaturgy and Dramatic Criticism at the Drama School. Catherine, are you there?
I'm here. Good evening, Dr. Drew. How are you?
I'm good. Now, I think you're also in New Haven, but where are you calling us from?
Traditionally, I'm calling you from just over from where James is. I usually am in Manhattan, but currently holed up in New Haven on a research project. So usually calling in from the lands of the Lenape, but I've joined James over here in New Haven.
Well, it has we were saying before when we were checking in with our tech stuff, it has a kind of Arctic Canadian sheen where you're calling in from. So it's very, very atmospheric, very wintry. Thank you for blessing us with that.
My pleasure.
Also joining us, last but certainly not least, Oscar and Emmy Award winning actress, Dianne Wiest. Selected film credits include Bullets Over Broadway, Hannah and Her Sisters, Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York, which some people think is his crowning achievement, and the recent Let Them All Talk, opposite Meryl Streep, Gemma Chang, Candice Bergen, directed by Steven Soderbergh, also featuring John Douglas Thompson, a friend of our company, which I watched actually over the holiday season on HBO Max and enjoyed very much. Diane's many New York theater credits include Desdemona in Othello, opposite James Earl Jones and John Lithgow, on Broadway, Oedipus, opposite Al Pacino. She was in a legendary production of Salome, also opposite Al Pacino, The Seagull and the Cherry Orchard at Classic Stage, and of course, in 2016, Samuel Beckett's Happy Days at Yale Repertory Theatre, which in 2017 went to Theatre for a New Audience in Brooklyn, and last year went to the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. So a transcontinental production that reinvented Happy Days for the early 21st century. Diane, are you with us?
I'm with you.
And where are you calling in from?
I'm in New York.
And how are you doing? How was your holiday season?
It was extremely quiet. I was by myself. My daughters, one is in Minnesota and one is in Massachusetts, and they were too frightened to infect me, so they abandoned me. And I just was here with my dog and a bird I have, a cockatiel, Henrietta.
Well, hello to you, Diane, and also hello to Henrietta.
Thank you.
And before we get started, lastly, I would also like to introduce Grace Ann Roberts, my co-host, who will be moderating and monitoring the chat tonight. Grace Ann, are you there?
I am. Hi, everyone, and hi to Catherine and James and Diane. We're thrilled to start the year with you. And so many comments and well wishes for a new year in the chat tonight. Thank you all so much. But I'm here. Ask us your questions. Should be a great hour.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we're qualified to talk about what happened down on Capitol Hill tonight, but any questions you want about Dianne Wiest, about Beckett, about Shakespeare, fire away. And I thought we would actually start by talking about Happy Days, since it is such a significant production in so many ways. How did it come about? Was it a situation, Diane, where you had been wanting to play this role for a very long time, and it was about finding the right production team and the right theater to partner with?
I had wanted to play this role for as long as I could remember, and I was terrified of it. And so I even worked on it with some people. I was taking an acting course for teachers, and it was taught by Lloyd Richards was one of the teachers, and Earl Gister was another, and I worked on it with them. And then I decided that I just couldn't do it. I just didn't know how to even approach it. And then I met James Bundy at a book party for Rosemarie Tischler. And James, you take over.
And I so I remember meeting Diane, and we were chit-chatting, and I knew Diane had been at Yale Rep in vivid and beloved productions of A Hedda Gabler and A Doll's House in the 1980s. So I knew she had been in New Haven and was not a stranger to the great roles. And so I just happened to ask her, would you ever be interested perhaps in doing Happy Days? And little did I know of Diane's relationship to it, or that she is really, I would say she is one of the reigning experts on Beckett's work. I also didn't know that she had been in Beckett premieres in Washington, actually, when she was a member of the company at Arena Stage. So I was thrilled that she said yes, and that led to this unlocking of her extraordinary perspective on his work.
And when you say the role is a challenging one, obviously Happy Days, for those of you in the audience who don't know it, is the role in which you are buried up to your waist in dirt.
In the first act.
In the first act.
In the second act, you're buried up to
your neck.
Your neck.
So was it just the physical challenges of the role? Was it something about reaching a certain level of experience as an actor that made it feel challenging? What made you feel like you were unable to unlock it at an earlier stage in your career? And then
well, I couldn't figure out how to memorize the 63 pages. That's really just Winnie talking. Because, for instance, oh, no, I'm not going to be able to remember a line, but for instance, she says a line, and then Beckett writes, she puts the cap of the toothpaste down. And then she says another line, and she picks the toothbrush up. And then she says another line, and she brushes her teeth. And I couldn't figure out whether you were supposed to memorize the physical things or just the words and then do the physical things. I'd never come across a text like this, where, and the physical was as vital to the verbal, to the words, as the words were to the world. So you couldn't ignore anything. And I just became overwhelmed with it and didn't know how to do it. But then when I committed to James, I told him, I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I just sat down. It took me a year to memorize it. And I was doing other work at the time, but it took me a full year. And then I had people run it with me constantly, because if you didn't run it constantly, you could forget to put the cap down, you know, or forget the line, or do you go to the bag 50 times? Is this one of the times you turn to the bag? James could tell you, having endured watching me, and so can Catherine, the trial and errors of it. But once I could put it on, I was so comfortable. I was so at home. And I felt like I'd never done anything but this role all my life. And that maybe I was really Winnie.
Catherine, yes, Diane was saying that you as the dramaturg have sort of a front row seat on this process of transformation.
It was one of the privileges of my life, truly. I've never seen that kind of acting, and been privileged to watch it being built bit by bit. But I wanted to remind Diane, we had a conversation about the role at the Maynard Mack lectures, probably in 2016, maybe late 2015, not quite sure. But I remember asking you about your comfort in the part, and you talked about being bound by the waist, but feeling a kind of infinite space within that. And maybe you could reach back to that feeling and express it better than I just did. But I remember being struck by your sense of space within the confinement.
Yes, it was so freeing, because Beckett takes such an incredible, precise care of the actor. And he really puts you in this mound, and you really understand that you can't move except for your upper body. And so with your upper body, you kind of fly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's so fascinating to think about the way Beckett uses silence, and all, you know, in Godot and Endgame, silence and pauses, ellipses are written into the text and have to be honored almost in the way of a musical score. But it sounds like what you're saying, Diane, is that by the time he gets to Happy Days, he's thinking in dancerly terms as well about
no, it's still the same, really, Drew. The silences and ellipses are there just as they are in Endgame, and they're there, but they're there. But it is a musical piece, but because you're free for half the play, or more than half the play, you also can fly.
Right, no, yeah, I'm not saying that he stopped writing silences in, but it also seems like he extends his focus to the body, and with the same level of dramaturgical detail, and almost scores the physical movements in a similar way.
He does, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
No problem. James, did you and Diane sort of build these chunks together? Because, you know, if you spend a whole year memorizing this play, it seems like the level of the work is so detailed and so meticulous and so minute.
Well, the other thing that I remember Diane observing to people, you know, the idea of detailed stage directions feeling prescriptive to actors, right, is one that contemporary acting culture tends to cleave to. Like, don't give me all these stage directions; they're gonna mess me up. And Diane. Oh, also, I will say, Diane is the most fearsome rehearser of plays I've ever worked with. And one of the things this production had, because it moved around, we had, there were 3 different assistant directors, and one in each location. And I can remember sitting, no matter which one I was with, there would always be this moment where they just thought they were watching some afternoon rehearsal, and then there were just tears streaming down their face because of Diane's investment in exploration. But the thing that she said that was I thought so compelling is that for her, she found freedom in the form. That once she had the form, she didn't register the form as an imaginative block. She registered it as something that empowered her to fill and explore, and we kept seeing that. I'd watch that production again 10 times in a row tomorrow because she found new things every time.
Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, I wanted to offer a little example of that. I remember there's when Diane, when you say if the mind were to go, it won't, of course. And we had a little you worked it both ways, and you went both with the if the mind were to go, it won't, of course, as a punishment for Winnie, that even there won't be the freedom of losing your grip on reality. And then also I said, well, what if you tried it the other way? And you flipped it, and you did both things. You so committed so beautifully to them. Maybe you could talk a little bit about those 2 choices and how they changed Winnie and what you felt about those 2.
Yes. There are so many things like that James and Catherine discovered, so that they would make a suggestion like Catherine just described, and I had thought, well, at this point, if the mind goes, what could be better? It would be a blessing. It would be a blessing if the mind went. Then on the other hand, it could just be really a lot of extra torment. And so it depends on how the evening went, or if Catherine or James would suggest I do it one way or the other that night. It just, I didn't really think about it. I know that doesn't make sense, but I really didn't think about whatever was going on. I really wanted my mind to go, because also that could be like a kind of, what's the word I want? A kind of heaven. Does that make sense? A kind of heaven. If the mind were to go and you were free, you wouldn't know that you were roasting in the sun and you haven't moved your legs for a millennium. On the other hand, if the mind were to go, it could be much more tormenting. And so the mind won't go, of course. My mind's not going to go. I'm going to stay here and do what I have to do here. My mind's not going to go anywhere. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me.
Right.
And actually hearing you all talk about the limitations of the form and yet the freedom of the form at the same time. And then also this example, this line, if the mind goes, how do you play multiple simultaneous and sometimes even contradictory meanings in one line? Reminds me so much of Shakespeare, right? Because in Shakespeare, you have the language, you have the verse, and it's this incredibly confining thing from one perspective, but it also can be incredibly liberating if you find the right way of playing it. And it also can ensnare multiple simultaneous contradictory meanings at once. I was talking to a director about the Scottish play, and how do you reconcile Mackers being this malevolent, child-killing, despotic, worthy of impeachment tyrant, and at the same time, we're kind of on his side, you know? It seems like something similar is happening in Beckett, even though it's a kind of different score. It's more like a modernist, you know, string quartet than it is like a symphony, to use a musical metaphor, but it seems very, very similar. And we were talking before we went on the air about your relationship to Shakespeare, Diane, because in this Maynard Mack lecture that Catherine was mentioning, what was the quotation, Catherine? Something about the way Shakespeare's language feels in your mouth?
Yeah, Diane said Shakespeare didn't fit in her mouth the way that Beckett fit in her mouth. And I thought maybe that would be an interesting thing for her to
Yeah,
talk
I would be fascinated to hear about that.
Well, it really is just lack of education. It's that simple. I didn't go to college. I ran off with the Shakespeare Company, having no training. We had 2 station wagons and a U-Haul, and played like civic centers in the Midwest, and closed after a couple of months for lack of funds. But I remember, and I was so really, my parents came to see me and they were so worried that I wanted to be an actor, and they were right to be worried. It was grim. But that was sort of not a great experience. And then I tried to study Shakespeare with some of these wonderful teachers that I met along the way. I did The Tempest somewhere. And I met Kristen Linklater, and she tried to help me put it in my mouth. But I never, once in a while I could understand that you have to do this at the end of every sentence in order to get to the next sentence, in order to build it. James should talk about this, not me. But I can't do that. Or I couldn't, or I didn't have the wherewithal to do it. So I really, enough said, it didn't fit in my mouth because I didn't know how to think about it.
Yeah, and just to put this in historical context, you attended the University of Maryland at College Park for a semester or so for some period of time.
I kind of left with the Shakespeare Company mid-semester.
Wow, well, that sounds like a story for the memoir. Whatever.
No. I mean, maybe, I don't know. It wasn't that interesting. But here I am doing the Cherry Orchard at Classic Stage Company, and there are these 2 gentlemen waiting outside the door for me, and they say, "Hello, you may not remember me, but I was the producer of the American Shakespeare Company," which was the name of the traveling troupe. I couldn't believe it. There he was. 50 years later, or 40 years later, however many decades.
But then Diane, so you then become an ensemble member at Arena Stage during one of the sort of golden ages of that theater in the 70s. You play Hedda Gabler at Yale in the 80s for Lloyd Richards. You've played Ranovskaya and Arkadina at Classic Stage. So you are this great actor of the classical American theater. You have played these amazing, great roles. You've played Desdemona opposite James Earl Jones, and was it John Lithgow?
No, it was Chris Plummer.
Chris Plummer. Okay. So yeah, no mean company there. So despite what you say about Shakespeare not fitting in your mouth, it's obviously untrue on some level. Do you have any memories of playing Desdemona or any Shakespeare story?
Yes, I have a lot of. Let me narrow this down. These stories. This production I think, the 7th Desdemona. I don't know how many directors it had, but when I came in, Zoe Caldwell, who I worship, had 2 weeks before she started rehearsals for Medea. And she was chosen to do my costume, do my wig, and put me in the production in Florida in time for it to get to New York. And she was inspiring. And when she was there, I could just fly. But I have to remind you, I still don't have any training. So all this time, I'm just kind of failing on my feet, you know, and I pick up, and sometimes I'm good. But most of the time, I really am stumbling around like a clown. But when I was with Zoe, I could do a wonderful Desdemona. Well, Zoe left to do Medea, and I was up on stage, and I remember very clearly thinking, well, I don't know what I'm doing, so I won't do anything. And I did nothing. And I was just torn to shreds, as I should have been. And then after all that hoopla was open, I began to go to work. And I ended up a very good Desdemona, from being a very bad Desdemona. But when all the opening and all the stuff went away, I don't know whether if James Earl Jones was here, he would quite agree with that. Because one night after I was dead on the bed, I got a terrible coughing fit. And it was, I didn't, you know, I went like, I couldn't move because I was dead, but I tried to sneak around when James was in front of me, sneak around and, you know, cough into the pillow or cough into my sleeve or something. And Jimmy didn't know what to do for me. And so his idea was to throw himself on me. And he did, but it caused a huge cough and got a big laugh. So that's my tale of Desdemona.
Well, we're all muted on the Zoom call, but all three of us are dying right now with laughter. That is an amazing. It reminds me of when we did The Winter's Tale with Rebecca Teichman, and we went around, and the entire company told their favorite stories about the statue scene, and how there was I think there was a Hermione who had gas one night during the statue scene. And it just, like, that scene took forever. And it,
oh my God.
Well, so Desdemona, it's interesting you talk about becoming a great Desdemona by the end of the run of that production, that you started off kind of doing the statue version of Desdemona. And then by the end of it, it was actually a performance that was fully inhabited.
Yes.
And fully lived in.
I hope so, yeah.
I'm also fascinated to hear a little bit about playing Hedda Gabler for Lloyd Richards, and also hearing Catherine and James about the Lloyd Richards era at Yale, because one of the through lines of this series that we've done, we've talked about the importance of Joe Papp to the American theater. And you also got your start in New York with Joe Papp on some level, Diane. But it seems like Lloyd Richards in the last 40 years has assumed a gigantic and even bigger presence with every year that goes by in terms of what he did, introducing the works of August Wilson and Athol Fugard and David Henry Hwang to the American theater, really supporting this entire generation of actors, but also as a great director in his own right. So do you have any memories of playing Hedda? And James, I think, were you at the drama school when Lloyd was the dean?
No, but Catherine was.
Catherine was. Do you have any memories, Catherine, of the Lloyd era?
Sure, of course. I actually was also his assistant and the associate, or Gister's assistant, had desks in the same office in front of the dean's office, and the assistant to Earl had a day job at 4 o'clock and would flake off at 4 o'clock, and I got to be the assistant. So I spent a lot of time in front of that. And I was at 2 years while I was there. Lloyd, I was there for the last 2 years of Lloyd's tenure. And I think that it's clear that, you know, he also with Winterfest, he's so recentered the importance of the playwright to the theater, It had gone, our artistic director, he was only the second artistic director of the Yale Rep because it had begun with Brustein. And it had a rather classical repertory with some new work and some exciting work, but Lloyd really brought back to the center of the theater's mission, the new writing. And he did that by also being artistic director at the same time of the Eugene O'Neill Playwriting Center. And those things were very symbiotic. The plays that he would sort of work on and discover over the summer would make their way into Winterfest or into the season. And to your fine list of the new work that Lloyd championed, I would of course have to add Lorraine Hansberry, where it all really began, and his vision to understand the importance of her work and his passion and the work to get all those thousands of angels to get that show up on Broadway and Raisin in the Sun. I'm always fascinated. Of course, Lorraine Hansberry was gone too soon, dead of cancer. I'm always fascinated with how Lloyd's attention would have worked with Lorraine and with August. It's one of those, unwritten stories of the theater. Whether August might have slipped his notice if he still had Lorraine. So Lloyd was always, of course, he was also a great champion of O'Neill's work, of American work in general, and he always knew, as tonight's guest is proof, how to spot good acting.
Right. So really the complete package. And I think there's a famous story about Lloyd and Lorraine working on A Raisin in the Sun, I think in a tryout production, and spending all night in a hotel room, making final edits to the play. So he was sort of an Elia Kazan figure as well, a kind of dramaturgical director who could give notes on a play and make it something that it was. So Diane, do you have any memories of being Lloyd's?
Oh, I have such memories. I first met him when I had done nothing but waitress at the O'Neill Foundation, and he was running it then. And Chris Durang had a play, and Chris cast me in his play. It was like on a ship. I don't know if anything ever came of it, but I just remember I was a nervous wreck, and I just remember his kindness, his gentleness, his lack of judgment, his welcoming, and his championing the playwright, as Catherine, as you both have said. I'm thinking, as you're talking, I'm thinking now of Black Lives Matter and the changes that's going to bring to theater, which has been a pretty white place. Lloyd really began all that, in New York anyway. But with Hedda, he had a great eye. If I would do something, and I didn't know, I could trust him to say, don't do that again, or, go further. And so that's, to trust a director, to trust his eye is, it's a real gift. And I had that complete freedom. He gave me complete freedom in rehearsal. He never told me to move there or do that, or, he just gave me freedom. And so again, I just was able to just go with that role. And he was sort of, absolutely supportive. He was the same with Doll's House, but I didn't feel that play go forward. It's not as well constructed, I think, as Hedda. It doesn't have a forward, it's not like a train running down the track there. It has many bits and pieces and flutterings and this and that and Christmas trees and children. And I don't think I did a very good job with that, but we tried. But Hedda was the role that.
It's true, actually.
And then years later, he taught me And when I teach, I still do a couple of his exercises that he taught me, which are some of the best exercises I've ever come across to introduce a class of actors to each other.
Interesting. James, you are, I believe, the 4th dean and artistic director that Yale has had. Is that right?
I'm the 5th dean and the 4th artistic director. There was a dean, Curtis Canfield was dean from 1955 to 1966. But the rep was founded, as Catherine mentioned, by Robert Brustein, whose book is right behind you.
That's right. Yes, you spotted it. I always have an Easter egg on these nights. So yes, I'm not no shots at Lloyd Richards. You know.
What does James win for spotting the Easter egg?
I don't know. It means I don't have to answer it in my Friday newsletter. But you were saying James.
So yeah, I'm the fourth person to have both jobs. And the other thing I would just observe about it is that, you know, his influence. Diane mentions, you know, being taught by him. He was very influential acting teacher as well. He taught at NYU for many years, and among the people who were students was a man named Ron Van Loo, who went on to become the head of the acting program at NYU, teaching there for 29 years before he came to Yale, where he taught for 15 years. Lloyd's reach was vast.
Yeah, certainly Ron Van Loo was teaching when I was at the drama school and inspired incredible devotion among his own acting students. So this idea of Lloyd having a family tree in terms of the politics, in terms of the playwrights, in terms of the acting, like as a director, incalculable in some ways. Yes, Grace Ann.
Yeah, as we're talking about Lloyd, we have a question from an audience member, Sheldon. For you, Diane, you mentioned using some of his exercises for introducing actors to each other when you teach. And if you would be willing to share them, you know, we've spoken so much about teaching just this evening and in our pre-show check, but I think our audience might be interested to know.
Yeah, it would take, the one that I love would take a half an hour to explain. I wonder if he's written them down anywhere. You would have to act it out, but you ask, you know, a class to choose a partner they do not know, and then it sort of goes from there. And by the end of it, you feel so close to this person, and you're asked to say goodbye to this person that you won't see them again, and you weep. Most people were weeping at the end of the exercise, but it has many, it would take me a long time, but you get very close to the person that is your partner from being a complete stranger. And it's not all nice. I mean, you have to pick out something that you don't like about your partner, you know, which is hard to do when you don't know somebody.
Sure. Well, maybe we can, for Sheldon who asked and others of you, if you're interested, perhaps we could see what we can find after some research.
Yeah, I bet he wrote it down somewhere.
Yeah, we'll
It's
see.
really wonderful.
As long as it's not viewpoints, because I can't count the number of times I've had to do viewpoints on day one of a rehearsal. Even as a dramaturg, they say, oh, the dramaturg has to stand up and join in. And viewpoints, for those of you who don't know, is you move around in straight lines and then diagonally and then up and down. I'm sure I'm garbling it and getting it all wrong, but.
No, it's nothing to do with lines. It's just to do with looking at somebody right in the eyes and doing something to them and having them do something to you that may or may not be comfortable or maybe extremely uncomfortable. And this goes on for half an hour. And at the end of it, there's an intimacy, whether you like it or not.
Fascinating. Well, I do want to pause for just a brief second for a kind of programming announcement. Grace Ann, you have an update on our 2021 series in the Shakespeare Hour.
Yes. Yes, so just to take a quick second and remind everyone, we have confirmed and announced further Shakespeare Hour Live episodes through March 10th. So you are guaranteed to have Shakespeare Hour at least through this first half of the year. So you'll see a slide up now just kind of showing you some episodes we have coming up next week. We're visiting West Side Story, which many of you were sad to miss on our Shakespeare Musicals episode, but we're dedicating a whole hour to West Side Story, don't worry. Michael Kahn is going to join us in February, and we'll finally touch on The Taming of the Shrew in February as well, a play we've talked about a lot, but have yet to dedicate an episode to. So if you want to learn more and register, you can visit us online, and I'll drop a link to the chat right now for that. But we'll be with you at least through March. So looking forward to that.
Great. Commercial break over. Back to Diane. So Diane, you in the 80s start acting in quite a lot of films and winning quite a lot of Oscars for them, right? So you spend some time away from the stage, 2 Oscars. So not just a one-time fluke, but a multiple-time Oscar winner. And how do you then find yourself coming back to the theater after this experience, this ongoing experience in Hollywood over 10, 20, 30 years? Was there something that drew you back to the classics?
No, I kind of didn't want to ever leave, but what happened was I did start doing some movies, and I got some money, and then I had 2 children. So I have a child for each Oscar. But the children are what prevented me from doing theater, not the films. So I want to say 4 or 5 years I didn't do a play. And then at Lincoln Center, now here I'm gonna forget everything. Joanne Akelitis asked me to do with Francis Conroy and Liev Schreiber, asked me to do a play in the summer house that really isn't a play. She's a great writer. Jane
Bowles, I believe.
Jane Bowles is a great writer, but she's not a playwright. And I found that out too late and the hard way, but going back into that, I thought, wow, I can't leave again, because you almost can't get back into it, or I couldn't. I couldn't even memorize properly. I couldn't remember what to do, as though it were any different from film. Is not that you don't do anything different. You know, it's just somebody's here, somebody's way out there. That's really the only difference. But I didn't know that. So you put all these impediments, or I did, put all these impediments in front of you thinking, stop it, you're not doing film now, you're doing theater. And you become worse and worse and worse. It really took me a long, long time to get back on in the saddle there.
Well, and In the Summer House, I should just say, that is a quasi-legendary production, at least to me. I know when I was at the drama school, we talked about that play quite a lot as this lost masterpiece by Jane Bowles, who should have had this amazing career. It's so fascinating to hear the other side of the perspective.
I mean, it could have been. She's a great writer. I love her. And I would do it again. I mean, the play, but it's like really dragging around a dead horse. I mean, to move it forward, is very, very hard.
I believe it might have been the inspiration. I have a theory that it was the inspiration for, which was the Tennessee Williams with the really Gothic setting, Suddenly Last Summer?
Suddenly Last Summer.
Yeah, because Williams and Bowles were very close friends, and I think he was involved somehow with her trying to write for the stage.
Right.
So anyways, you come back to the theater, you have this maybe unhappy experience on In the Summer House, which is a difficult play, even under the best of circumstances. And at Lincoln Center, you're giving it everything. Then you're in All My Sons, you're in a Cynthia Ozick project, You're in Salome, which at the time, that play had not been revived in a very long time by Oscar Wilde. So you're searching out a lot of these really interesting projects that are not the kind of typical ones for
Yeah.
Hollywood star. Did they find you, or did you search out things that were more
I have to say I guess they found me because I didn't know about them until you know, Sidney Lumet called me up and said, "Do you know Cynthia Ozick?" And I said, "No." And this great writer, and she wrote this incredible play called The Shawl. And yeah, that was a dark journey because it's about, you know, Auschwitz and being in a camp, and an aunt and her niece and a baby. And so Cynthia was there. It was incredible to be part of that, but also very, very hard, really hard. And it came off, but we started it somewhere in Sag Harbor, that theater in Sag Harbor. And then we brought it in off Broadway, but it lasted a very short time.
You were also in Wendy Wasserstein's final play, Third.
Yes. Yeah.
Was that similarly a difficult project, or was that more of a joyful one?
No, that was she was already very, very sick. And so that was a kind of amazingly painful.
Well, I'm sorry to be asking about all these incredibly painful experiences, Diane.
Yeah.
It's just such a fascinating career that you've had.
Well, Happy Days was nothing but joy. That's why I keep on doing it.
One more question about Shakespeare, if I can. You said that Shakespeare doesn't live in your mouth in the same way as Beckett. I'm curious, is there a role that you feel like you never got a chance to play, or a role that you've always wanted to play in the canon? A role that you would perhaps...
Yeah, well, you know, I aged out of all the great Shakespearean women. I aged out of Juliet, you know, and Isabel, and all those wonderful roles. By the time somebody would cast me, and I don't know why they would, because I still hadn't had any Shakespeare training, but by the time I thought, oh, I know how to tackle this now, I was too old to do it.
So no, in other words.
No.
Well, are there any other, yes, Catherine.
I wanted maybe Diane to talk a little bit about the difference, you know, since you've been bound in a jug in play and in the earth in Happy Days. Maybe you could talk a little bit about encountering. You know, I joked in our program note that, you know, Beckett always thought a woman's place was in the scenography, and I wonder if you had a thought about the difference between being, I don't know which woman were you in? Were you one or two? Do you remember in play? And then being Winnie. Maybe those kinds of, was there a difference in being bound in those two productions?
Right, and then Footfalls also, you're bound by your footfalls. You can only go 4 one way and 5 another. So you're very bound by, he gives you your physical circumstances. And from that, a world is grown, you know? And the jar, the same. I was the second woman too, who was the mistress. And that was the first Beckett. And I did that with Alan Schneider. I did all the Beckett with Alan Schneider, which was, I didn't know how amazing that was at the time. I sort of knew he had correspondence and knew Beckett, but I didn't get it. I was too young or stupid, really, I think. But right away in that jar, I was, and the precision, the line had to come. If you messed it up, you really hurt your fellow actors. If you messed up your line, I talk about music, the notes, you know, But I was so comfortable. And that was the beginning of falling in love with him.
I guess the only thing left is to get into a trash can as Nell.
No, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that.
Well, Diane, you have been in Pinter's A Kind of Alaska.
Yes, that was Alan Schneider too.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking with Keith David about Alan Schneider a month ago before we went on hiatus, because he had studied with Alan, I think at Juilliard, and then said he saw him. He was in a show at La Mama that toured and saw him briefly before he was, the story is that he was in a motorcycle accident. He was just a pedestrian, I think, or in some kind of car accident.
He was in London and didn't know which way to look.
Yeah, he was in London. I understood it was a truck, but he looked the wrong way and stepped into the street. And that was during A Kind of Alaska.
Oh my goodness.
That I lost him. Yeah, that we lost him.
Yeah, and of course, Beckett and him were very, very close friends and collaborators, and corresponded in this amazing way. He's in all of the Beckett.
Well, and Pinter had come to the rehearsals, and Oliver Sacks was there. And Albee, I haven't done Albee, but Alan found Albee also, Edward Albee. So, it goes on. He really was wonderful with writers. He had a great gift for finding great playwrights. He did not have a gift for directing. Am I the first one to have said that?
I'm not aware. I never heard that he was not a great director of actors. I think it's okay to say that.
Well, it's the truth, not because I adored him. I loved him, but he was not, I always, when I think of him doing Godot, I feel so badly for Beckett because he didn't really get it. Or couldn't do it. He got it, but he couldn't do it. He didn't know how to work with actors at all.
Interesting. I'm curious, James, as a director, hearing these reflections, how do you come to Beckett as a director, knowing about the history of his plays and how difficult sometimes they can be for actors to realize, or for directors to realize them on the stage? And I'm also curious if your conversations with Diane extended to these other parts of the Beckett canon, as it seems like they did.
They did. What you've put me in mind of, Drew, is that, and it harks back in this conversation to what Diane was talking about whether if the mind goes, that's a good or a bad thing. So in the interpretive spectrum of how people approach Beckett, there are a lot of people who sort of compress the individuality and range of the actor to leave those ambiguities almost by not making the choice, right? That the sound of the language itself is deemed enough to convey the multiplicity of experience. So it leans heavily on the poetry as opposed to on the humanity. And I think, because you can see a lot of different productions in the same way that you can see lots of different productions of Shakespeare, right? Some of which will emphasize more poetic values, and others of which will really be, quite poetically free, but viscerally human, right? And John Barton might say there's a sweet spot where those two things meet. And I think there was no question working with Diane, but that she was always going to know more about Beckett than I did, because she's read it all and I haven't. And she's read the novels, she read everything, and so and in fact, I was in a room with Catherine, who knows it all also, and a graduate student who had gotten a double first at Oxford, and another graduate student who was preparing his comprehensive exams on Beckett. So I was freed from any literary obligation whatsoever, and able to be a kind of a surrogate audience member, right? To just what does this incredibly complex story encoded in this very simple physical form, how does that land? Where is it taking me? And then to watch truly a genius at work and be able to say, what if, every once in a while, which then would sometimes not be helpful, and other times yield things that I couldn't have even imagined when I made the suggestion.
Right. So the value of being in the room and responding as a human being, right? The value of that first impression, how it lands on you as an audience member, is something I think it's very easy to lose sight of with Beckett. But then you remember that he was this huge fan of Buster Keaton. He was this huge fan of theater in its most joyful and simplest, most populist forms. And right, isn't there a famous quotation, Catherine, you probably know this better than I do, but that you have to be a clown to play Beckett deep down, that on a deep level, his work is the work of clown.
Absolutely. And I think that, you can see the thread of music hall. This is the thing that Diane's talking about in terms of what you have to understand to get Waiting for Godot, which the critics, when it first came out, described as a play in which nothing happens twice. And so in order to make nothing happening twice interesting and entertaining, you have to have the comic timing, which is so important. And that's one of the things that, in the sequence where Winnie's trying to put her hat on and keeps getting interrupted by Willie, that just took us forever to just get it exactly right, because it's so well scripted. Or the shower cooker story of Mr. Shower and Mr. Cooker. Mm-hmm. Those things are little vaudevilles implanted in the play that if you don't have someone with the comic chops of someone like Diane, you're sunk, and not in a good way.
Right. I think Beckett is probably easier to make funny than some passages in Shakespeare that are meant to be funny.
That's just because people do that hey nanny nanny thing with Shakespeare. They do the oldie timey thing as opposed to driving into as James was saying, the human experience of why things are funny. What's funny about the language is what they really lean on, and then they just play some sort of Renfest zany, and it's not funny at all.
Right, which is one of the eternal challenges of classical theater, right? Is taking these old texts, which spoke in very vivid and direct ways when they were originally written, and not playing the style, but finding the animating humanity underneath.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that the Shakespeare Theater is actually a really fun place to go to a play is because you can go there for years of productions without ever seeing somebody grab their crotch and do really bad indication of faux Shakespearean sexuality. Right?
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, I can think of. Anyways, we'll not talk about those productions in this chat. Well, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, about Diane, your illustrious career, about Samuel Beckett, but I think we'd like to leave it with an air of mystery and suspense. I want to thank all of you for joining us, Diane, Catherine, and James. Grace-Ann, are there any last words you want to share?
No, I will just close out by saying there has been so much love in our chat for this conversation tonight, and for you, Diane, lots of reflections about how you've impacted people's lives and performances they've enjoyed. And most recently in the hour, reflecting on your time in arena stage. Some people are reflecting on our town, I think, they saw you in. So you're still very, very much present here in our theater community here in DC. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And to Catherine and James as well, a pleasure.
All right, well, next week, some of you will remember the episode we did on Shakespeare and musical theater. Due to popular demand, we are doing a mega episode devoted exclusively to West Side Story, which is surely the masterpiece of all musical adaptations of Shakespeare. Returning to the Shakespeare Hour Dr. Carla Delegata, Natasha Diaz, and also joining us for the first time will be Meg Zervoulis, Associate Music Director of the most recent Broadway revival. We hope to see you next Wednesday, if we still are in the United States of America. Signing off, I am Drew Lichtenberg.